Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Spectral Cliff Tea session. This will be the 6th in 6 consecutive Cliff Teas. This is the last one in this series. We've had a fabulous series. We started out with lamb. What could be better than ending with spectral? So, as we're thinking about what we're going to talk about today, and I'll tell you already what we're going to talk about. We're going to have a summary. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Spectral session. This is the 6th in the series, the Cliff Teas that started last year. Oh, this has been going on for a year. Started last year with lamb and are ending up today with spectral. So let's start out with shop news. What's going to happen in April that is of relevance to many of you? We are going to be taking a trip, April 21st through April 29th. It's a tea trip. I urge those of you who are thinking about it to come to some sort of decision because several things. I will send out a contract this week. Secondly, in terms of tea trips, we have everything nailed for this trip. And we're really excited about the prep that's gone on the Chinese side. People on the Chinese side have been extremely helpful at the farm levels, at other levels as well. This is going to be a fabulous trip. The other thing to remember, year by year, trips are unpredictable. In other words, going on trips are unpredictable because we don't know what the international situation is going to be. The international situation this year is favorable, and we simply don't know what next year is going to be. There's lots of reasons that the trips now should be considered one and done because we just simply don't know what's going to happen next. So at any rate, for those of you who are interested, take advantage of this. Secondly, let's talk about some of the things that have happened within the shop this week. On Sunday, just as we're trying to close, very predictable, of course, 6 people are trying to get in. And these are 6 Chinese people with a couple kids as well. And, you know, we're trying to get ourselves ready to kind of close up and so forth. But they said in Chinese to the boss, they said, hey, we came up from Sunnyvale. It took us a long time to find this place. Can you let us in? And so, of course, the boss, being who she is, said, yeah, well, of course. It turns out they own a famous restaurant down in Sunnyvale, and 2 chefs and a couple of the owners came up because they have heard of this shop for 2 or 3 years. And so the comments, and this is from their customers, the comments have been, oh gosh, there's this really great tea place up in Oakland. And you know, the really great tea place gets their attention. And remember, we're talking about the Sunnyvale crowd. This is Silicon Valley up in Oakland. And they're thinking, no, you just lied to me. Up in Oakland, great tea place? And so it took them 3 years to finally get it together and come up here and check it out. They came in and right away astounded because they saw scope. So that's half the battle. Second half is, you know, they fumble around as almost everybody does. Okay, what is it that we should be drinking? Chose some great teas with the help of Bijou and sat down and absolutely were astounded. Ended up buying tea leaves and ended up concurring. Yes, up in Oakland, that place that one tries to avoid sometimes, there is this great tea shop. So it is really nice to have people at this level come in They serve tea at their restaurant. They know tea to a degree. And it was really just very nice to have them come in and appreciate what they saw up here. So that was one piece of shop news. We've had lots of new people during this last 2 or 3 weeks. It's been a lot of fun to help people find their way among the boards. We've also had help from some of you who've made some suggestions how to make it easier. So we're thinking about those suggestions, and we're going to integrate some of those suggestions in how we move forward. So that was all the great shop news this week. So what magic thing am I going to talk about today? Spectral. Well, it's got a magic name. I'm not going to talk about a ton of new stuff. Instead, I'm going to do a summary of what we've learned over this past 6 weeks. So let's start with history first. Cliff teas come from one place. That's called geography, by the way. Now we'll get to history. The one place they come from is northeast Fujian province, Wuyi Mountains. There have been many tests over the last 100 years comparing teas from this area versus other oolong teas from other areas, same varietals. And the science is really good, and the scientific evidence coming in is really good. Yes, same varietal, different results. Why again? Because the soil is different. The weather is different. And we had a new person come in this week and said, okay, I want to learn the names of the different species of plants that are being used for the different categories. I said, uh-oh, well, there's good news and there's bad news. The great news is you only have to learn one name. The bad news is you're confused. It is Camellia sinensis. That's the species of plant. And it's the way you process it and where it is grown is you end up with a certain outcome. And there's no exception for any of the styles of tea. So going again back to history, realizing that northeast Fujian province, the soil composition is very minerally, especially in the best of the places. We ask ourselves the following question, and over the last 6 weeks, the answer has consistently been, there was a minerality in these teas when they were being produced as green teas. So back in the Tang Dynasty, when this was going to emperors, they were tasting the minerality in the midst of green tea taste. So what changed? Well, first off, 1368, you can't make tea cakes anymore. 1393, the emperor is really mad because some people are still sneakily making tea cakes. And the emperor says, okay, for those of you who were deaf before, I want you to know I'm not kidding. And there's going to be severe penalties if more tea cakes. So sent soldiers to destroy all the tea cake making machinery. And that included some that still existed near the Wuyi Mountains. And now everything was loose leaf. Between 1398 and sometime in the late 1500s, all of a sudden, a new style. Now, I said all of a sudden, but I gave you this year range, didn't I? So that's almost a couple hundred years. So during that couple hundred years, farmers developed a new tea style. And in fact, probably was driven by monks, both Taoist and Buddhist monks from Anhui province, where they had been experimenting with something which at the end of the day ended up being red tea. In the Wuyi Mountains, they took this experimentation and did further experiments. Oh, this is good. Maybe we can do better. A few more steps. Hey, this is even better. Oh, you know what? That farmer over there, he's doing that. Maybe I'll do this. And so by late 1500s, early 1600s, you were already seeing in the Chinese market great cliff teas. So that is a simplified version of the history of cliff teas. What happened to cliff teas after, they start to come into their own? Well, people in Europe start to taste them probably late 1600s, and they say, hey, there's some really good stuff here. And then you had all the desire for these cliff teas, and then there was confusion between cliff teas and red teas, and eventually, in the 1800s, because the British stole the formula for doing red teas. They were actually trying to steal the formula for cliff teas, but they couldn't quite get it right because it's really hard. It's like a customer years ago said, oh, just tell me the soil composition, tell me what species of plant, tell me approximately what the weather is, I'll grow a cliff tea. Sounds good, sounds scientific. Answer is no, you won't. And it was the same when Robert Fortune, who was the Britisher, he's actually Scottish, I know, British Islander, who stole the cuttings and also either kidnapped or encouraged workers to come with him to India. And really the attempt was to get a cliff tea. That's not where it ended up in India. That's not where it ended up in Sri Lanka. It ended up as red tea instead. And that's kind of natural because you go through the cliff tea steps, and the best of the cliff teas go through 25, 26, 27, 30 steps. The best of the red teas, not so many. Maybe 18 at most. And it's much, much simpler, much, much faster. It's much more suited for plantation growth. As we know from these sessions, the cliff teas are really crafted. Everything needs to be touched many times. All the leaves need to be touched many times. And it takes time. And so it's not one that's really suited to huge plantations. It's suited to small operations. And that's what's happened over the years. And that's why in India, you got Assams and Darjeelings and some of the craft teas there, but they're not quite like cliff teas. In fact, they're nowhere near like cliff teas. What's the other reason again that they're nowhere near like cliff teas? Soil composition is so much different. You're working minerally soil, just perfectly suited, relatively lightly acidified oil, just perfectly suited for the cliff teas. So we've learned that, or we've reviewed that during this period. After the 1800s, cliff teas started to go into umbrage. In other words, started to have a cloud pass over them. What do I mean a cloud? This is a cloud in terms of disappearing from public view. And it was intensified by 1949 because Japanese invade China in 1931. They really invade the main part of China in 1937. Farmers essentially disappear from the landscape during the daytime so that they don't run afoul of Japanese soldiers. And so everything is kind of grinding to a halt. I mean, there's stuff that's still growing and it's secretly growing, but the big production grinds to a halt. 49 rolls around, order restored, trying to grow a country. And when you're trying to grow a country, what's the first thing you have to grow? You have to grow food supply. You have to grow quality of tea. You have to grow food supply. So food supply was the main order of business. And these teas They didn't change. They were great still, but there wasn't the demand because all these other things were taking place. Suddenly, in the 80s, particularly in the late 80s, people start to realize, oh yeah, there's some good tea up here. Now, that mattered, but not as much as you would have imagined, because was China enriched by the late 80s? Not yet. It was on the way to enrichment. So the difference between the late 80s and the late 90s, dramatic. The farmers in the Wuyi Mountains sold their teas, these great cliff teas, for, essentially $10 a pound. I mean, for nothing, so to speak. Was it that they weren't very good? Oh no, still really good. Were they not doing the handcrafting? Oh no, they were doing the handcrafting. But China was in the midst of these changes, and who could buy them? Outsiders. I could buy that. You could buy it. But insiders, they were still developing their wealth. Now, this was happening fast. So by the end of the 90s, instead of $10 a pound, we're talking about already hundreds of dollars a pound. Why? Had nothing to do with me. You cannot blame me for this. I would have paid hundreds of pounds. I would have paid $10 a pound. Either way, I'm good to go. It was because the Chinese population was all of a sudden starting to re-recognize and pay for these teas. And as they paid for them, we had competition. And as soon as you have competition, price goes up. And that competition has just continuously, as China has enriched, affected the prices of the teas. Why is it that the best of Scarlet Robe goes for $500,000 a pound? Has nothing to do with me. I wasn't paying any of that stuff. Has nothing to do with you. But it has to do with the internal population. So this is kind of a history that's related to the popularity of cliff teas. It wasn't that people all of a sudden, it was popular in the 1800s, and then they went to sleep for 150 or 200 years, and then all of a sudden becomes popular again. It was simply the historical conditions which led to the change in popularity. And it wasn't change in popularity, change in availability. That's the real thing, that's the real message about these cliff teas. So that's history. Let's talk mythology for a minute. So or folklore, from the 800s all the way up to recently, you had several of the cliff teas start to take on a persona. Scarlet Robe took on the biggest persona. Oh, it saved this scholar. Somehow it got connected to an emperor who saved his wife, who bestowed a scarlet robe, and it went on a bush. And the Buddhist at this particular temple put the robe on the bush, and you had scarlet robe. Okay, lots of interesting stories, and really it points you to the fact that this tea was really good and well recognized. And whether any of this stuff happened or not, we don't care, do we? What we care is already there was recognition. Yeah, this is the good stuff. Let's talk about Scarlet Robe for a minute, because we've talked through these 6 weeks, we mentioned, there were those 6 magic bushes that still exist. You haven't been able to legally pick from them since 2000. And in order to have tasted anything from these bushes, you would have had to pay a king's ransom. Okay, so we all know those stories. What's the 2 other stories that are takeaway from these 6 weeks? Hybrids developed. Okay, so we know 4 or 5 hybrids. One in particular became the main one. And so from a flavor perspective, that's the one. And we have one of those called Cuppa. But there are other hybrids that what they did with them, and who's the they? The antecedent here is the farmers and producers. They combined them together and then roasted them together, so you got all these interesting flavors, which led to LCS activity because, you know, outsiders looking in, oh, this thing goes for a lot of money. What can I do to make a lot of money? Well, what you can do is take a bunch of different varietals of Wulong, if you're smart, and roast the heck out of them, put them on the market and say, yeah, this is Scarlet Robe, all right. And, oh, not only is it Scarlet Robe, it comes from in the mountain. You say all those things and all of a sudden everybody's willing to pay a lot. Problem being, it doesn't taste good. And it's a lie. So, Chinese have clamped down on that activity, by the way, so you have much less of that activity. But we've talked about that during these 6 weeks. So one of the things we haven't talked much about, but I've alluded to quickly as I've gone through things, are alleged health benefits. Let's drill down a minute on two of those alleged health benefits and why they exist. One is a lot of research going on about anti-obesity. That's one. Secondly, anti-diabetes. Type 2, by the way. Why? Why are these teas apparently good for this? Well, turns out, oh, and the story's even more complicated. I love this story because, you know, you're thinking, if you're a Westerner and you're thinking Western medicine, well, I want the latest one of these medicines. Even though it has 50 side effects, I would never, that's other people are going to get those side effects. I want those things because they're potent. Oh, and they're going to make me whole again, whatever whole constitutes. Turns out for the cliff teas, and this is specific to the cliff teas, recently, within the last 3 years, they've done tests on cliff teas harvested and produced in 2001, 2011, and 2020. So they did them side by side by side. And ooh, what a surprise. They found that the 2001 cliff teas, because they had aged and been aged properly, had certain effects that didn't exist in the newer. Same varietal, by the way, 2020. And these effects were highly beneficial for anti-obesity. In other words, let me back this up because I'm saying something, I don't think I'm saying it right. Anti-obesity, let's get rid of that. Let's pretend I didn't say that. If a person is already obese, they are extremely helpful for reduction of obesity. That's the correct way to say this. Secondly, they found that the 2011, same varietal, same way of processing, just aged differently, most highly effective for diabetes. And why? Well, not for getting diabetes, anti-diabetes. Why? Because apparently the aged compounds work with the microbiome and change dysbiosis. I love all these big words. Let's translate them into, you know, your and mine English. They take your gut microbes and get rid of the bad ones and grow up the good ones. And the good ones help your body function so that it is easier to take up insulin. So this is really, really astounding. And this research was completed within the last 3 years. And there were actually 2 separate teams that were working on this independently. And they published their results within, I think, 3 or 4 months of each other. And it's just astounding. Who knew? We knew that aged white tea is magic. Who knew that aged cliff teas also are magic? Does this mean that the 2020 cliff teas, oh, well, I'll just buy this and put this away. I can't even drink this because, you know, I'm not getting any of the benefits. No. There are still benefits. They're not the same benefits, and they are precursors of the benefits of when they're aged. So it's really interesting. We've heard over and over since the 1990s, when Bijou and I first really started delving into tea, we've heard over and over and over again, hey, aged teas are great. And yet, you know, I hear this stuff and it's like, aside from the white teas, I don't see any proof. And so the result was, I barely even said to you at any time, we should be doing aged teas. I said you should be doing aged white teas. They're like magic, you know. And it's like you go up to the Magic Kingdom and get the real good stuff. Yes?
Rob asked, how does one volunteer to be in the magical tea experiment? Does the control group get market tea?
Love this question. Sadly, these volunteers for this are all in China. And it's really interesting because the first study that did it, I think they had 3,500 people. So 2,300 already had either precursor or already were diagnosed with diabetes or obese. 1,300 of them, oh, let's see, you're doing the adding there, 23 and 30. Oh, yeah, that's right, I said 3,500, okay. 1,300 of them, 12 to 1,300 of them, didn't have those conditions, and so they still studied them to see if they developed those conditions. So that's kind of how they proceeded. This was all people in China. This was all people either in the hospitals or through those hospitals who volunteered to be part of these studies. I'm sure that in the West, there will start to be more studies about this. And then we just have to pay attention to when we can hook up to these studies. I'll tell you what, if anybody comes through here, because they should actually come through here, because we have aged teas. And we have some teas that are real old and would qualify for test teas. I'll let you know if that ever happens here. All right, so these are the health benefits that I really am clear about in terms of understanding, because there's good science. You had 2 groups independently do this. They're working on a lot of other things. I'm even afraid to talk about those other things because some of them are really exciting. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But what I am going to tell you is there was this very exciting study that was done between cliff tea and the same varietals grown in another part of China that still had a similar landform, but it wasn't volcanic soil. And the results produced by the cliff teas wasn't even close. And part of it has to do, for some reason, the L-theanine in the cliff teas is more. And even when it's not more and degrades, it degrades into a product which is apparently useful for humans. More to come on that because they're doing studies on this right now. And I just love all the stuff that they're doing. Now let's see, am I beyond? Oh, yes. And you know, I always know when somehow I have gone on more than I should have. You know, because people at their tables all have cups. And when the cups all go up in the air, This means very thirsty. And it means that the audience is even more thirsty. I apologize for making you all so thirsty this morning, but this was the summary class and I had to get a few of these points in. Okay, without further ado, it is such a great pleasure to bring on a beautifully outfitted, coiffured tea master, Bijou. Yeah, that's you.
你好，早上好。Yeah, my name Bijou. Yes, Bijou. I like it. So also we do 岩茶 from Wuyi Mountain. 岩茶 Okay, so John. So I prepare this the loose leaf. Yeah.
So you see the typical setup. Nothing here is a surprise. Couple cups. We have Ishin pots, tea toy. The rules for this particular one are 200-degree water. It is 7 grams, 4 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and you're observing. And truly, for those of you who love Cliff Teas, which I believe is everybody on this broadcast, at some point, an Ishin pot should be in your future. If you don't have one, this is an investment that for the rest of your life, every single day, you'll be glad you have this. Of all the tea tools that I own, this is my favorite. It's not that I have a bias. Again, I do love all my children. All right, she's heating up the cups, making sure they're absolutely clean, heating the pots, pouring on the inside, pouring on the outside. We want as much heat as possible because of the way these teas are done. More heat is better. And you notice the tea master just has this steady rhythm. She's going to make 4 cups. She has 4 pots out here. No wasted motion. She knows where she's going. She knows what she's doing. Poetry in motion. She takes each of the trays. She's going to put the tea without handling it with her fingers. Put it directly into the teapots. Just artful. So you see we have 4 pots. 4 of them are 16 ounces. The one she just put it in is a 12 ouncer. This is a 16 ounce. Covers the heated pots, shakes them all, trying to get the tea leaves heated. I've set the timer 4 minutes. And she pours from this kettle that has a neck so that she can see where she's pouring. She's trying to theoretically pour under the leaves. That sounds weird, but it's pouring on the side of the cup so the water swirls up from underneath, pours from on top of the pots. Make sure you get the heat going. Drawing more water.
去，再去。
呀，已经有两个。Okay, she's poured into the pots and the timers are set. And I want to take advantage of this little intermission to remind you that next weekend on Sunday from 3 to 4:30, we have this acclaimed author, one of our customers, Terry, who's written a book. And he's going to do a book signing and talk about his book next Sunday, 3 to 4:30. And it costs $25 to get a ticket. This is something you need to sign up for ahead of time. And you'll get a tea and one of Rob's wonderful baked goods. So that's next Sunday. And really, the whole magic of this is Terry's story itself is really, really interesting because it's the story of his family through the generations and the various permutations that have occurred in his family's lives. And it's been a journey of exploration, and Terry will share with you some of the highlights of that, and you'll be able to ask him important questions about how he came to think about doing this, what surprising results have occurred through his research. And this has been a project he's worked on for about 3 or 4 or maybe 4 or 5 years. And we've watched it blossom within the tea shop. I urge all of you who can make it to actually come next Sunday, because I think you, and this is Sunday, January 18th, not tomorrow, Sunday, January 18th. I think you will be surprised by the depth of what Terry brings to life in this particular book. All right, so that's that event. In the meantime, we are brewing Spectral. Spectral has gone through all the normal processes that a Cliff tea goes through. It is one of the newer ones we have in the shop. And this one, I'm not going to spoil the surprise for you. This one's different from lamb. It's distinctly different from lamb. It's different from Black Dragon. So all of these, and that's the thing I think that surprises everybody. And it really boils down to something that the Chinese can't even answer. So if you ask the question in the Chinese tea community, how many different varietals of Cliff teas do you have? And you ask 10 experts, you get 10 different answers. If you ask experts from 100 years ago, you would have said over 1,000. Experts now say somewhere between 1 and 200. And more keep being discovered, by the way. All right, by the way, the timer has gone off. Tea Master, using nice tea rhythm, is separating the tea leaves from the tea water. Not in a hurry, just very steady. And if you asked me the following question, I would give you the following answer. If you said, does every pot produce the exact same flavor? And the answer is no. They're all within a relative range until you get to a higher end pot. When you get to a higher end pot, it's obviously a different range. Clay matters, as it turns out. And again, the lesson from the Tea Master today is truly about consistent rhythm. Okay.
It is. It is. This is yours.
All right. So,
This is good. Okay.
let's take a look at these. Okay. Take a look at this color. What a beautiful, beautiful color. So, this is always a favorite part because you're already getting, before you enter the quality arena, you're already getting a little bit of the aroma. You're beginning to salivate. And then you enter the quality arena. I'm going to do that. It's an inhalation, 200 degrees. Evaluating astringency, aftertaste, energetics. Energetics occurs over time. The astringency, you get some sense right away. Aftertaste, you get some sense. Second time around, you're expanding. You're thinking about aroma and taste, which is what I'm going to do this time. And, by the way, hopefully you've gotten your tasting notes out from the previous 5 sessions, because this is different. All right, it's your turn to brew. So yours is in bag number 3, labeled Spectral. 7 grams, you set your timer for 4 minutes. And this is just fun going through this process, especially when we're in tea rhythm. Absolute fun. You know, one of the reasons, as somebody who's very busy, and all of you are very busy, one of the reasons you might not necessarily do an oolong during the day is because you're so busy and you don't have time to take real tea rhythm. But if you really need time during the day and you really need a break from what you're doing, what a wonderful way to get lost for 20 minutes, because this tea demands your attention. You can't be a casual cliff tea drinker. You can attempt to be a casual cliff tea drinker, but there's certain physics of this that don't allow you to be casual, because you got to pay attention. Oh, is this inhalation hot, or is this just usual hot? Or has this cooled down? There's all these things about the mechanics, the actual mechanics, that are different from so many of the other teas. You add your water. And you set your timer. So really, there is value in looking at your notes. Here's what we do every time before we go back to China. We have a compendium of notes. It's almost encyclopedic. Varietals, times we did it. Occasionally, we know we're going to be looking at some teas, and we have some of them that are aged. And so before we leave, we take notes about those. We actually make it and take notes about those, because we kind of want to get a balance, not a balance, but a reference point. Because we know from our original notes what these tasted like right at the beginning. We see what they taste like now. And so when asking us, because sometimes we have you ask, well, are you ever going to replace Polestar? Well, the answer is really hard, because yes, we still know that farmer. If you had original notes from then, you would say, God, I wonder if these guys are getting old. You know, they brought back something that doesn't taste like the original. They're not very good anymore. They used to be really good. See, this is why we're so careful in taking notes, because we know you take notes and we know you pay attention. And you all have the same high standards that we have. And part of that is, if you advertise a tea tasting a certain way, it better come back tasting a certain way. And if you are going to backfill, so for example, 2 years ago, we backfilled Cloak of Heaven. And the only reason that we were able to do that was the taste came in so similar to the original taste. It's like, oh, gosh, I don't have to do anything. Boink, backfill. The last time we tried a sample of Polestar, it came in, I said, oh my God. I covered my eyes, and it's like, if I tried to put this on the board for Polestar, all those who've been here for drinking for years and who remember that taste very specifically would think, oh, he's all of a sudden fallen into the LCS category. What a shame. That's what you would have thought. It just wasn't that rich, deep taste. Therefore, we reject it. So our decisions, this is why we have to take and keep copious notes. And this is why actually when we go to China, we do these tastes, and usually we know ahead of time what style of tea, so we review the style and we think about, okay, here's what I remember, here's what my notes say, here's what my expectations are. So what are the tea styles that are usually farthest apart year by year? It really is the cliff teas. If you get a green tea, they can be different, but usually that difference isn't a night and day difference. And that's the key thing. Because if I bring something in that's relatively close, let me make sure I hit the time. Oh, I did. That's relatively close, then, because I actually had a timer going on in my head. That's why I turned around and looked. You know, that's okay. If it's not anywhere near, that's not okay. All right, timer went off. Wasn't that interesting? I think we all have this because we've been doing teas for so long. You kind of know, like, hey, wait a minute, why didn't I hear timer? Because certainly for me, as soon as I hit something that's going to time things, in a way, subconsciously in my head, I'm running a timer. And so if all of a sudden I come to a point, because just as I was talking to you, I came to a point, wait a minute, that was 4 minutes. I turn around, 2 seconds away. So our internal timers are pretty darn good. All right, so you've created your cup. You're going to enter the quality arena. It's an inhalation. And by the way, that should give you confidence also, because we have so many things that all of us together over the years doing these teas, we've come to recognize how to do timing in our head. We've come to recognize, oh, the color of this isn't right. Or, oh, that doesn't quite smell right. Yes?
Rob says the warm leaves had a mineral quality with hints of chocolate and roast. But the tea water smelled like honey or dried fruit sweetness with cinnamon, lemon, and hints of cider.
So Rob talked about the dried or the heated leaves, hints of chocolate, hints of roast, and then the tea water, which had a honey sweetness, more of honeysuckle, I believe.
And, well, or dried fruit with and also with some cinnamon, lemon, hints of cider, quite a mix.
Great. Cinnamon, lemon, hints of cider. And I love these descriptions because if you look back at your notes, none of your beginning descriptions, because I remember the things you said, was like that. This is clearly different than the others. Yes?
Jonathan observes, knowing that Wulong changes flavor as it ages, when do you decide to choose a tea for how it tastes now versus how it may taste in 2 or 3 years or beyond?
Wow, what a great question. So Jonathan asked a really key question, and he asked a question that we as buyers actually are thinking about, and that is, how do we make a decision? How do we make a judgment about tea taste when we're buying versus what it's going to be in the future? So let's go back to Cloak of Heaven for a minute, because this is a perfect example. When we got Cloak of Heaven, we were so excited and said, yeah, this is going to develop into something great. Well, as it turned out, all of you agreed because you drank it up so fast. So we didn't have it to age around the same way that some of the other teas age. And that's what caused us to go back and get it. So again, we were thinking as we were going back and getting it, it can't be too far from that. Scarlet Robe, year by year, is different. And it's different whether we're buying keeper or whether we're buying a mix of the other hybrids, because we do both. And so we tell you, we used to tell you directly, now most people don't ask, but we actually used to catalog by year, almost like a vintage, a wine vintage, because that came in so different that some years we told you this is going to be lighter, or this is going to be heavier, or this is going to emphasize sweetness, or this is going to emphasize something else. So we are very aware that we're in an ephemeral taste range. And that ephemeral taste usually doesn't last for more than 2 or 3 years. In other words, so why were we able to get Polestar and Amber Orchid for 4 straight years? We got those for 4 straight years because Amber Orchid in particular came through with a taste that if I had sat you down side by side, year by year, you would have said, yeah, this is the same tea. Polestar the same way. It was so rich, that richness spoke for itself. And so early on, we made a decision, and this all goes into naming conventions as well. We're not going to put up a tea even if it's the same varietal with the same name, because it will confuse you. Not only will it confuse you, you'll think, these guys don't know what they're doing. You know, why didn't they go back and get the same? It's like asking why a wine year result isn't the same as the previous wine year's result. Things change. Oh, weather changes. All the physical characteristics change. But in China with the tea, it's even more complicated because processors sometimes have in their head, hey, you know, my dad did something special with this one year. I'm going to do that special thing, and boink, it's another tea from your perspective. It doesn't taste the same. And for me to try and convince you, well, I'll just use this name and you'll be convinced. No, you won't, because you've tasted, you remember. Yes?
Just to circle back to Jonathan's question, then how does that all play into aging? Because I get from what you were saying how that could play into aging as well, especially because you said for a lot of them, flavor will dissipate after 2 or 3 years. But are those considerations you raised about how it's so different from year to year part of the aging decision making?
So this is really a question then about when we're let's see, is it a pre-buy or after-buy? Because that's the key thing here. Because if it's an after-buy, here's what we do. I love this question because it's really complex. If it's an after-buy consideration, what we are doing every year, remember I've told you, and I say it lightly, and it probably sounds like I'm not paying attention, but it's one of the most important things we do. We taste every tea at least twice a year because we're making a judgment of how this particular vintage ages. And what we're trying to do from a buying perspective is look forward then, the next year when we go, okay, we see it's aging this way, we see it's coming through this way this year. This is giving us a clue as to how this tea may age. Because, varietals, this is really a great question. Varietals tend to age somewhat similarly by varietal. So what do I mean by this? Polestar, we knew it wasn't going to be 100% what it was the previous year, but we knew it would be close enough that, okay, people aren't going to think we've lost our tea tasting minds. And therefore, we're going to call it that, we're going to backfill it, and that's going to be the way it is. Other teas, and so what we've learned, and actually this is a learning question. You're asking us, what have we learned over the years? What we've learned over the years, and it's truly a great question. Thank you, Jonathan, for this. What we've learned over the years is the more heavily great single source roasted teas will have a higher possibility of being backfilled versus the more aromatic, lighter, full flavored teas. The one exception to that being amber orchid. Almost every other lighter tea has come in so different year by year, can't put it in the same way. Captivating, for those of you who've had Captivating, we got that 2 or 3 years ago. We don't believe we'll ever again experience that exact flavor. Nowhere actually near that exact flavor. By the way, we've been looking at that particular varietal for 15 years. And we purchased it early and it was okay, but from our perspective, it didn't raise all the way up here. Captivating was all the way up here. And we were so excited because it's a varietal that's, from our learnings, has never been up here. Do we expect to be able to get one again? And the answer is no. We think, because it's a lighter one, that a bunch of lucky factors occurred. So it's like your very most favorite Cabernet. Your Cabernet comes in one year and you say, I will never drink another brand again. So the next year you go back and you buy the same brand. They lied to me. They promised me roses last year. They lied to me. This is what we are avoiding with you. If we can't put something that is of that same quality, we won't backfill it that way. We'll create a new category. Yes. Did that answer, by the way?
Yeah, well, yeah, yes, I think so, and yes, and Jonathan thinks so, and it's great to point out the complexities. Thanks, Ryan, for reminding me of the time. So, a couple of more comments. Rob noted that today's tea, interestingly, reminds him of cinnamon and atomic fireball candy.
Cinnamon and atomic fireball candy. I think this is my favorite remark of all time. And I will go back to the farmer and talk about atomic fireball candy, and I'm sure I'm going to get that blank look. But that's okay, because just the sound of that is exciting.
Aggie observes, like Rob, I found the dry leaves to have hints of chocolate and fruit, plum. The wet leaves had a strong wet rock scent of minerality. Smelling the wet leaves even resulted in a sweet, clean sensation on my tongue.
Oh, this is great. Smelling the wet, she said smelling.
Yes.
Smelling the wet, thank you, Aggie, I love this. Smelling the wet leaves created a clean sensation on Aggie's tongue. What a great comment, and it shows how smell and taste are linked together. This is a deep reminder to us that when we say things about taste, we're also commenting about smell and vice versa. Beautiful comment, Aggie.
Aggie also adds she found the tea water to have hints of honey, but overall the flavors are very light and hard to narrow down at the moment.
Great observation. Flavors are light and hard to pin down at the moment. They're fleeting, and then they well up again. Oh, you mean spectral? I mean, they fleet up and then they disappear? Names matter. We don't give names unless that's somehow related to the tea. Great capture on that, Aggie.
Rob has a couple additional comments I'm going to read. One is the taste has center of the tongue astringency, and there's a feel on my tongue of pepperiness. Not the taste, but the feel of black pepper. It's also sweet, smooth, and thick.
Sweet, smooth, and thick from Rob in terms of taste. And I really like that he talks about the astringency in the center of his tongue. By the way, you and I must have a crossover in gene stock because mine is at the center of the tongue. And this sense of peppery, and he said it exactly correctly, a sense of peppery. It doesn't exactly taste like pepper, but it's a sense of, if you've had pepper, I get that. Well said.
Aggie says the mouthfeel from even the first sip coats my tongue. It's drying and smooth, light astringency.
Drying and smooth, light astringency from Aggie. And what was the first part?
That it fully coated her
That's
tongue
right.
from even the first sip.
Fully coated her tongue. So light astringency, but that flavor, which is spectral or fleeting, fully coats the tongue. So you see, it seems contradictory in the beginning, but you're actually tasting this through this tea. This is so different from the others because of that exact quality. Yes.
Final comments in light of the time. Jen E says, white pepper, not black, but yes, get the pepper, and fascinating flavor. The scent of the dry leaves smelled like autumn in New York, but the scent of the tea began with whipped honey and burnt caramel before smoothing into a light honey note. The flavor was similar, began light with a hint of sweetness, but as it has cooled, the minerality has become more pronounced.
Love this comment. Thank you, Jen. Light, sweetness, honey, and as it cools, the flavor covers the mouth.
And
Also, the first part of that.
And the minerality comes out.
The minerality
Yes.
comes out. That's what I really wanted to capture. The minerality comes out. You cannot taste a real Cliff tea without somewhere in that discussion having minerality. And Jen wraps it up with a distinct minerality comes out, but does that deny sweetness? Does that deny burnt caramel? Zero denial. It coexists. The beauty of the Cliff teas. I think we all love our Cliff teas. Now, of course, we again love all our children. Some of them are a little bit more favorite than others. Oh, did I say that? Love going through this series with you. Let me think about what we're going to do. What do you do after a Cliff tea? I'm confused. Maybe, how do we get comfortable doing something after a Cliff tea? Maybe we should do a white tea. Maybe we should do comfort next week. That sounds good to me. And is there anything that can kind of eclipse a Cliff tea? Well, white tea is the closest, so maybe we should follow that up with eclipse. But it's just that small gossamer feeling. So the third one in the white tea series will be Gossamer Silver Needle. We're in for a different but fully fun journey over the next 3 weeks. And for those of you who are wondering, and you're not wondering that much because you know I am the understudy, which means that I'm always behind. I haven't posted those yet on the website, but I promise within the next day that'll all be posted. And if you're needing to purchase that, it'll be on by Sunday. All right, your responsibilities this week. You know, everybody out there is wearing masks and getting sick and getting meals or whatever they're getting. Nobody in here is doing that. That's because all of you are so strong. And you're drinking this stuff. Keep it up. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.
Take care, folks.